Yes, hello. This is T Perfect, and me with Dart. We're going to be debating this time on our honorary Lights Out podcast. Here, we're going to be doing Shaq versus Wilt, who was the most dominant, and I think Shaq's the answer to that question for a number of reasons, which I'll be laying out, and I think that I'll have a more convincing argument than Dart. But let's see what he has to say.
I got to say that I don't even think it's close how more dominant Wilt is than Shaq. Shaq really has a lot of negatives in comparison to dominance is. And T Perfect, although all of the debates are gone, this is going to be another W for me.
We'll see. Hey guys, so I'll be going first, and again, like I said, this is going to be our Shaq versus Will honorary debate, and I'm in a position that I've always had this too, that Shaq was just the more dominant player for a variety of reasons, and not to say that Wilt wasn't dominant, but this is a very nuanced discussion, and there's a number of reasons why I believe that I'm right. So let's kind of go dive into it and see where this argument is kind of coming from. It's formulated not only around stats, but also there's a heavy amount of context when you're talking about domination, and the eras and the competition also factor heavily into it. Okay, so I mean, we're talking about just overall winning and impact on winning. I mean, Wilt has 2 rings, no dispute with that, but Wilt won his first Finals MVP when his stats were far from when they were prime. He was averaging 19 points, 23 rebounds as a 30 leading scorer. So. Also, when he won his first championship in '67, his normal proclivity for taking heavy amounts of volume shots were not really conducive to team wins, especially when you see that season in the playoffs, down from his first 9 years when he was averaging almost 34 shots a game. His original style wasn't really conducive to the team aspect, to winning, and that was more than evident because of the way that his team struggled, even though he was putting up phenomenal numbers. Now, Shaq, however, was pretty much dominant from the jump. He never ever led the league in field goal attempts, but he consistently led the league in field goal percentage, as he will, but Shaq's was better. Shaq was always a team-minded, but he didn't really need to have that dominant amount of volume shooting to actually contribute to the team, just because he was so unstoppable, he was so productive.
You talked about the eras in the competition, and that's why Shaq is more dominant than Wilt. I think that's irrelevant. I think that you can only be dominant in your time and place. So I would nix that off of a reason. I think it's irrelevant. Him being the Finals MVP in 1972, he did dominate. That's why he was awarded that. The pace started slowing down in respect to the stats, and he dominated otherwise versus scoring how he did in the beginning of his career. With the volume shots, it doesn't matter in respect if he shot a lot of shots. He still was a 7-time leading scorer of the league and had some fantastic stats to back it up, which I'll get into. So to be dominant means to be commanding, controlling above all others. It's defined in basketball by Wilt Chamberlain with his stats, his recorded advanced stats, his individual achievements, his compounded achievements per season, his records and rules changes that he brought. So his regular season stats dwarf Shaq's, pretty much 30 points per game to 23.7 for regular season. With his regular season, his best regular season stats are 50.4 points to 29.7, which is almost double. Same with the rebounds, it's 27.2 to 13.9. His average playoff stats in the rebounds are almost double as well, and more than double, with 24.5 to 11.6, and nearly double in assists with 2.7 to 4.2. And then it's also the same with the playoff stats. And you may mention pace of play, but it still doesn't take away from his dominance over his contemporaries, period. So, for example, with Elgin Baylor, he had a 12-point per game lead in the 1962 season with that 50.1 per game that I brought up prior. That's the point of it. Shaq never dominated his contemporaries in that case.
That was impressive, but at the same time, we have to consider the context. During his first 9 seasons, when he was winning the scoring titles, was even close to that. And was he efficient? Sure, but that doesn't take away that there was no one else even. It was basically playing outside the system. Not a lot of or any titles to show for that during that time until he actually completely rewrote his game to fit into systems where he would actually contribute as what the team was expecting. Also, pace of play is important to talk about. You talk about the rebounds, how it dwarfed Shaq, his points and everything. The average pace of play during the 60s from 60 to 70 was 124.7 as far as possessions per game. Compare that to Shaq from 1992 to 2004, where the average length or possession per game was 92.5. Shaq was still putting up similar scoring numbers. In fact, Shaq has a better scoring average in the playoffs that he does, or than Wilt does. And obviously, he has the 3 rings as the best player without having to adjust his game. He just became more dominant because he was doing more with less shots. He was wildly more efficient. He was way better as far as playing into his team system and cohesiveness. And in fact, he was significantly better than Wilt, 58% to 54%. Now, also, we'll get into this in the last round. I want to talk about how the competition, as you mentioned, does play into it as well. But just the context around Wilt's overall stats is super important to understand because of the fact that, yes, we've never seen anywhere close to that amount of possessions per game. And that contributed toward the insane amount of rebounds, the scoring average, and as of his shot, you're talking about someone who was putting up those numbers, but Shaq was at or near the top of the league in scoring every single year. We're putting up half the shot attempts.
All right, so the volume, it's just a time and space thing. So they had more volume because that was how they played back then. If you do the adjustments, the 100 possession, it really is just a matter of could it be done that way? There's no evidence for it. It's just math. So him rewriting his game is evidence of his dominance because he was able to transcend and become the assist title champion during the season when he started rewriting his game. That's how prevalent and how dominant and versatile he was. He had the capability to do it. So he also, in respect to the rebounds, he was still, just like the points that I was talking about, still dwarfed his contemporaries with rebounding. Bill Russell was next. Then it was Bob Pettit and other great centers and big men. And then the field flattened out, and instead of at about 25 rebounds per game, it got down to about 14 rebounds per game past those guys. So he still absolutely dominated the rest of the field in respect to those stats. And one of the things with the dominance, to be commanding, controlling, and prevailing over all others, that's why the statistical titles matter. He had 7 scoring titles, 11 rebounding titles, 6 seasons. He got 2 of them, and then by far he has the most individual. In respect to the team winning, yeah, he didn't win 4 like Shaq did, but he won 2. And both of them were the 2 highest winning champions that they had until 1996, with Michael Jordan had the 72 win team. So he broke his own record from 1967 to 1972, something that he also is more dominant than with Shaq because he has roughly around 50 to 70 records without counting them one by one. And Shaq only has 3. So that's the capability that Wilt Chamberlain has, and he still has these records, and he hasn't played since the mid-70s. That's over 50 years ago.
Again, I leave it up to the eventual judges here to decide on that. Like, what's more impressive, averaging 28 points per game and 13 rebounds on 60% shooting while taking 15 shots a game, or 35 points per game while you're taking 29 shots per game. That's really the story of Wilt's claim to fame when you talk about his dominance. And like I said, even my opponent admits, he really didn't see a huge level of team success, especially on that last. He only has 2 rings to begin with, but on that 72 team, which was one of the greatest teams ever, sure. But he was a third leading scorer, and he was really asked just to be a defensive presence. Obviously, he could still score, but he was really kind of taking a back seat and being more of a facilitator, more of a Bill Russell type. And that's what you saw Russell do with his entire career. But as far as the competition, too, not factored in. The competition isn't even close. Shaq came into the league facing basically if we talk about at a positional basis, no other athlete, I think, has faced harder competition at their position than Shaq. He came in facing Prime Robinson, prime Ewing, prime Karl Malone, prime Alonzo Mourning, prime Hakeem, Kevin Garnett, Charles Oakley. All the list goes on and on. He was facing the toughest competition every single night. He was giving them numbers, and Shaq was propelling his team every single year. Especially we saw that in 2000s. He didn't have the luxury to take a backseat and be the third leading scorer on his own team. They wouldn't win that way. He had to be dominant. The offense was always through him, and he was efficient, and his game spoke for it. No other team or players replicated the amount of dominance he's had from 2000 to 2002, with 3 Finals MVPs and MVP, arguably the best season in history, most dominant in 2000. So when we talk about that, and also, did Wilt have his competition? Sure. But there was a large problem with segregation. There was a lot of people who weren't allowed to even play.
You can't control the time and space that you play in. Wilt was absolutely dominant with the field. And one of the biggest guys, if you talk about competition, there was Bill Russell, who won 11 championships with a fantastic team. They had some of the greatest face-offs ever in NBA history. He also faced off against Nate Thurmond, Bob Pettit, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at the end of his career. It's not that he didn't have individual great competition. It was there as well. Also, Wilt did become dominant in respect to the team's success later on in his career when he did make those changes. And again, he did it with the assist titles, and he still won rebounding every year of his career. Something else is that in respect to NBA culture and folklore per se, Wilt Chamberlain is dominant in respect to his records, his capabilities, as people say he was, how strong he was, how fast he was, more so than Shaq. And here's something. What about the rule changes? So Wilt Chamberlain had 4 rule changes that are more or less associated to him, if not directly associated to him, while Shaq has 1. Shaq's is about hack-a-Shaq because they were trying to enable Shaq to still be great at the end of games. Wilt Chamberlain was responsible for widening the lane from 12 to 16 feet because the rules, they wanted to stop him. Offensive goaltending. Somebody takes a shot, he grabs it the last second, dunks it in. They stopped that because he was absolutely getting a ton of points off of that. The free throw line restriction when he was in college, he was able to dunk behind the free throw line. So Tex Winter wanted that gone. And then the inbound pass over the backboard, still scoring over that. So those things that he was able to do and dominate the field with, let alone his actual gameplay, where he actually had more skills instead of by doing the fadeaway, fall-away jumper, he had the finger roll, and he could dominate inside the paint physically, and he did so more as some of the rules relaxed.
This is what, I asked, we're going to ask the judges and pertain to, what's your flavor? What's your tea? If you're doing volume scoring and then you had no success doing that, credit to Wilt for adjusting his game, but he had to adjust it to such a point where you're cutting your shot attempts in half, right? And in order to fit into a system, Shaq never did that. Shaq was a system every single year of his career, basically, until he retired. And he was the most dominant force ever because he was putting in those numbers. You couldn't stop him. And he was more efficient, even though he was playing against better competition on a nightly, because there was no quota about how many players could play on a team or anything like that. And they had a lot more teams, a lot better competition. Most of the top 10 players as centers in history he went against. Sans, who Bill Russell and Kareem, but he never faced Kareem in his prime either. Did Wilt Chamberlain? So, or vice versa rather. But you're talking about a person he put together one of the best runs ever, again, from basically 98 to 2004, as far as dominance. And he was the guy. He was the man. And for me, that's, top 10 player of all time. I think Wilt is too, but Shaq never had to change his game in order to accommodate another team. And also everything was against Shaq. The competition was there, way more teams to go against, way more rules or much more defensive pressure, things like that. And it just, Wilt was great, incredible for his time, but to me, Shaq just edges him out because of all the things I've said and because of all those factors: the competition, the level of dominance consistently, and the way that he did that with basically multiple teams. And he won titles with multiple teams, and obviously the 3-peat.
Yeah, for me, I think Shaq's a fantastic player. I do think that he was rather one-dimensional, and it has nothing to do with dominance. However, I think that Wilt Chamberlain's dominance was more versatile, and there's evidence to it by beating out his contemporaries in scoring, rebounding, and assists. And with the team's success, in respect to the dominance, not year after year, so I still personally give the edge to Shaq in the team success. However, in respect to individual season dominance, Wilt Chamberlain held records 2 times for having regular season champion until 1996. Other things with that, the aspect of the rules changes. Again, you're so dominant that you are affecting the entirety of the league in respect to trying to stifle what you can do. The exception versus the norm is changed into something to create a norm through the exception of greatness and dominance. So to me, the rule changes, the records, the statistical dominance, the team success during the regular season to obtain the championships, and then there's just, let alone him getting all of these honors in the same season, and some of them missing. He never had the opportunity to win Defensive Player of the Year. He never had the opportunity to win defensive all teams until the end of his career, amongst other awards, including the Finals MVP until his second year. And on top of it, he was so dominant. You had mentioned in respect to Shaq that Wilt Chamberlain won MVP as a rookie and went to the finals the last year that he was in the NBA. So that's my case.